Hi, everybody. I'm Jim Sinacropi with another episode of the Around the Lakes podcast, where we take a look at the people and places that make up the fabric of the beautiful Finger Lakes region. And today we're a little something different. We're going to go above the Finger Lakes and actually way up to the stratosphere and beyond. We're going to talk about some high altitude balloon launches and a trip that my guest took to NASA and Cape Canaveral for a SpaceX launch. So it should be an interesting conversation. And I'm joined in studio today with Tory Carissimo, who is the founder of Overlook Horizon high altitude balloons, which I've seen some of your videos on YouTube, Tory, but why not explain exactly what that is to our viewers?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. Overlook Horizon, we started about 3 years ago. We're a nonprofit organization that focuses on trying to get students and adults interested in science and technology and running their own science experiments at home or getting more involved with coding or computers, anything like that. And our inspirational platform is high-altitude weather balloons. It's kind of a weird niche that I got into and that our team got into, but it really encompasses kind of every aspect of science and technology and math and engineering to launch this small package up to the edge of space and then getting it back and knowing that you accomplish that is kind of a crazy feeling, and we try to get students to have a similar experience.
And the thing that I enjoyed most about watching the videos of some of your launches is just the perspective you get, of not only our region, but the Earth, and kind of the perspective of how kind of small we are down here when you look at us from, so high above. Is that something that kind of intrigued you? Was the goal for you more just to say, hey, I was able to do this, or was it to capture that footage, that unique footage?
Yeah, well, the goal originally was just to see, could we do this? Can you launch this thing up into the stratosphere? I mean, you let it go, it's gone for 3 hours. You only see it for about the first 5 minutes, and then just trying to rely on the technology to work the way it's supposed to so that you can get it back. I mean, the very first cameras we started with were awful, like grainy pictures that came out, but we sent it up and we were expecting to see kind of the edge of space and black sky, but when we got those first images back, even with those grainy pictures, we're like, oh my God, this is fantastic. Yeah. We need some better cameras. We got to do this some more. And then getting more flights under our belt and starting to get more regular with some of them, and then starting to see, I mean, it's a pretty unique region that we're in with all the lakes that you get to see. And when we get up to 110 or 120,000 feet, to see the entire Finger Lakes region, it's kind of a cool backdrop other than just kind of land underneath. It's really accented by the Finger Lakes down below.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I mean, seen a lot of aerial photography and in the recent years drone photography, but you're taking it to another level, higher than airplanes go, higher than any drone could certainly go. Do you have to get any type of clearance with any type, like the FAA, to launch these things? So,
yeah, we do work really closely with the FAA. We don't, for the size that we're at, we're actually launching really small payloads. The Weather Service does these twice a day on a regular basis, and for the size that we're at, we don't technically need permission because they're not an aerial hazard, but we do, out of an abundance of caution, work pretty closely with the FAA. So we file flight plans ahead of time before we launch them. We notify air traffic control. We're actually on the phone with them just prior to launch. They actively track our flights from launch to landing.
Do they encourage you to do this?
We've got a couple of fans at the Rochester FAA office. They're pretty. Some of them have seen the photos and videos, and they're fans of the process. A lot of people interested in the science and technology behind it. We have to call them when our flight ends and when it lands, and we've had a couple times we call in and we tell them, yeah, it's landed, we're done for the day. And one of the air traffic controllers said, yeah, it looks like it landed in some trees there. Are you going to be able to get it out? So they were following along with the process and were kind of interested in what was going on.
Now we're going to also talk about a trip you took down to Florida for a SpaceX launch recently. And but before we do, I have some more questions about the high altitude balloons. So how do you control, like, why doesn't the balloon just keep going up and, keep going out of the stratosphere and into outer space? How do you make it stop at a certain point and then come back to Earth?
Yeah, so we use helium as our lifting gas, but you can also use hydrogen. Kind of the principles are the same, but you're going to fill it in a latex balloon, and in order for the balloon to rise, it has to displace the air around it. And so as it continues to rise, the atmosphere gets thinner, and the balloon has to stretch and get bigger to continue displacing the same amount of air that it once did down by the ground. So it expands the higher up it goes. When we launch it, it's about 6 feet in diameter. When it gets to the top of the atmosphere, it's about almost 40 feet in diameter. So it gets huge. These are monster balloons once they get to the top of the atmosphere. But eventually, with all our balloons, they reach their breaking point. So they stretch so much that they just break, and then they burst into a million pieces and then parachute back down. So it's kind of a passive control.
Does how much you preload it with helium depend on? Can you calculate how high it'll go by how you preload it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So depending on how much helium you put in, it will affect how quickly it rises, but it also will affect when it bursts. So the more helium you put in, the more pressure there will be on the balloon, so it will burst sooner. The less helium you put in, it'll rise slower, but it will have less pressure on it so it'll burst later. So there's a balancing act there, and that's part of the math that we get into. Is
there expense to each launch? Like, do you have to save up and budget and then do the launch? And
yeah, there's definitely an expense to it. But they're not crazy expensive, which is why it's a nice science experiment for kids or schools or even a home science project, because it can cost on the low end maybe $400 for a launch, including the balloon and the helium and your electronics and stuff like that. Our launches are a little more expensive than that because we put 3 cameras on board. We have kind of a bigger computer system, and we usually use one of the biggest balloons that we can to get as high as possible.
Just like a GoPro camera, or does it have to be something special that will withstand the atmospheric differences up?
Yeah, you can use a GoPro camera. We actually use what we lovingly call faux pro cameras. They're essentially GoPro knockoff cameras. They're actually really inexpensive. They cost about $30 on Amazon, so they're nothing crazy that we're using.
Do they come back to Earth reusable? Or?
Yep, they come back down. And I'd say 99% of the time they're reusable. We landed on power lines once, which fried all the cameras.
Oh, no.
But most of the time
once it's on its way down, you lose total control. You're just tracking it and going to where it goes, right?
Yeah, well, pretty much the entire flight is we have no active control over it. We run predictions ahead of time, and we pick a launch day and time that will match with a flight pattern that gets us to a safe landing area. But the landing is really plus or minus 5 to 10 miles.
Wow.
There's a lot of trees and buildings and power lines in 5 to 10 miles. So we can roughly control it, so we can make sure that it doesn't go into the middle of the city of Rochester or the city of Syracuse. But whether it lands on this side of the road or that side of the road it's up to the balloon.
Or the middle of one of the lakes, or
yeah, it's certainly we usually try to stay away from those, but it's actually not terrible to land in the middle of the lake. That would be relatively easy recovery, and as long as our equipment stays mostly dry, we'd be okay. Everything floats. But usually the tough ones we've landed. I mentioned we landed in power lines once. That was a tough one. We've landed in really tall trees way more times than I care to admit.
Yeah.
Those are really hard because you know exactly where it is and you're looking at it, but it's 80 feet up, and getting it down can be a real challenge.
So how would you get those down?
We've got some arborist equipment that we can throw chains up to saw down branches.
Right.
We've got air-powered, they're kind of like potato cannons, but they shoot up fishing line with a weight on the end of them so that we can try to wrap it up and pull it down. We're developing a drone with a hot wire on it so that we could fly it up and cut it down. And then this year, actually, our first flight that's coming up in a couple of weeks, we'll have an onboard cut down system that we can activate with a remote control. So that usually it's the string that gets tangled in a tree, and then if we can trigger it remotely to tell it to cut itself down, that could save us a little bit of time. Sometimes it can take 8-9 hours just to get it out of a tree.
So if there's a science or math or physics teacher somewhere, or school administrator checking this out, how can they get in touch with you if they want to get involved in one of your next launches, or have you come in and incorporated?
Yeah, so we're pretty active on social media. Twitter. We put out stuff on Twitter and tips and stuff like that at OLHCN for people that are looking to get tips on how to do their own weather balloon flights. A lot of times we see other people that do their own flights, and we kind of retweet tips or ideas that we've seen from them to help people along. And then they can always contact us directly on any of our social media or on our website at overlookhorizon.com. They can get in touch with us. We've got how-to guides to kind of get people started. Every flight can be different, and you can design your own flight, but we've kind of got the guides to these are the essentials to get started, and what you need to at least have a successful mission, and then you can kind of customize it to your own taste or do something unique.
So this hobby has kind of indicative of more of an interest of you in all things space exploration and science. And you recently got to attend a SpaceX launch just this last weekend, was it?
It was a week ago that I got back. Yeah.
In Cape Canaveral for a SpaceX launch as part of the NASA Social Program. Just explain to us what the NASA Social Program is all about.
Yeah, so NASA Social is it's an outreach program from NASA where they invite basically social media communicators or influencers that have a good social media following and are active, where I follow NASA and I'm pretty in tune with what they're doing and what SpaceX is doing. I'm a bit of a space geek, so I love that kind of stuff. But some of my followers may not follow it as intently as I do. So the outreach program is really designed to bring somebody like me or the other 25 or 30 people that they had down at the time, to bring us down, and we can kind of communicate what NASA is doing, get a little more detailed in the science that's on board the particular mission that they're launching, and then we get a behind-the-scenes tour of some of the NASA facilities that you can't normally access, even if you go down as a visitor to the Space Center. So what
was this particular launch event for?
This was the SpaceX Crs 17 launch. So it was the 17th commercial resupply launch to the International Space Station. So this is NASA's program for commercial private companies to send supplies and science up to the International Space Station. Now that we don't have the space shuttle program around anymore, they're using companies like SpaceX to send their cargo dragon up with supplies and stuff like that. So we get to see the launch and some of the science experiments that they had on board.
So what's your feeling on SpaceX? Commercial private entity now kind of supplementing what they're doing at NASA. I mean, for decades, all space exploration was, in the public domain of government, NASA, from, the moon landing straight up through to all the space shuttles. And now recently, it seems like NASA is kind of turning more over to Elon Musk's SpaceX, and it's becoming privatized. Just your general thoughts on if that's a good or bad thing.
Yeah, I was originally kind of hesitant on it when the shuttle program was coming to an end, because I was, how can you end the space shuttle? Like, this is awesome. But now that I've seen it in the works, like I really like the idea of it. I mean, they've turned over kind of I hate to use the word routine, but I don't know of any other word to use, but it's kind of the routineness of spaceflight, where they're launching commercial satellites, they're doing these resupply missions to the space station, and then NASA can kind of take that burden off of themselves, turn it over to the private side where things may work and develop a little quicker, and then NASA can focus on kind of the exploration portion of it, the stuff that doesn't have a profit, that going to putting people back on the moon or back on Mars, and
kind of
doing
more for just the good of humankind.
Right. They can focus on that kind of stuff, the innovative stuff, and the stuff that we've essentially mastered, I guess.
Right.
That's the actual launching of the rockets. They can push onto the private side, but then you've got companies like SpaceX that are now landing their first stage of the rocket. So they send it up, and they turn around the first stage and land it either on a drone ship or back on land, which is something that was unheard of,
Yeah, just earlier this year, they were able to re-land one of the boosters upright. It was pretty amazing, but they've also had some setbacks. As a matter of fact, just from my general experience in observing the space program and SpaceX, it seems like there's more setbacks with SpaceX than there perhaps has been in the past with NASA. Of course, NASA had some high visibility disasters with the space shuttle, with the teacher on board and explosion, but it seems like the private side in SpaceX has had their share of setbacks for sure.
Yeah, they've had a couple of setbacks. I mean, I think some of that comes with the speed at which they're trying to innovate.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I mean, the three kind of big setbacks that they've had, I mean, some of them are for the upcoming commercial crew program where they're going to be sending astronauts to the space station. They just kind of had a high-profile setback where during one of their tests they had an anomaly on the crew capsule. But it was during a test. Thankfully, there's nobody on board, and that's kind of that's the purpose of their testing program. You'd rather have it be fully tested and sort out those issues on the ground than have something happen to the astronauts. So I think they're able to innovate quickly. But it's been a learning process for them, and that they're just going to continue to get better at it.
Sure, and another wrinkle, I suppose, with the privatization of these types of space activities would be that now they're talking about space tourism. Within maybe the next 5 to 10 years, for the extremely wealthy, perhaps a chance to take a trip to space and back.
Right.
And then maybe in our lifetime, it could be affordable to, the average Joe. I mean, I'm sure it would still cost more than a plane flight to Disney, but is that something that, would be something that you would take advantage of if it ever came to within, reach financially?
I love the idea of it. I don't know if I'll be the first one on board.
No, yeah, I tell you, I like it. I don't even like to fly, so
I'm with you.
But yeah, it also kind of, to me shows just how primitive maybe we still are. If we were to go ahead maybe 500 years from now and look back at this time, we always view ourselves as being so advanced with the age of the internet and everything just seems to be so modern and technology driven nowadays. But really, if you jump ahead a few hundred years, everything's going to look totally different. And the stuff that we're talking about now with space exploration might be as simple as hopping on a plane to Walt Disney World.
Right. Well, that's why one of the things that I think SpaceX is doing is good for the spaceflight industry. Like, they are, with the recovering of boosters and some of the fairing recoveries, they're trying to lower the cost of getting to space. So if they can lower the cost of getting to space, they're going to have more flights that they can do per year. Satellite providers and even NASA themselves will be able to afford operating these flights on a more frequent basis. And then stuff like that can get sorted out so that it becomes even more routine than it is maybe even now, where they've had time to find any possible issue that could go wrong, so that a space tourism program that may come up in the future would be completely hashed out because they've had so many satellite launches on the same vehicle and with the same provider.
Well, we have some photos from your trip, so maybe we'll run through some of these and you can describe to our viewers what we're looking at here. This is after you're actually inside. Where's this?
Yeah, this is day one. So the first place they take us to when we get down there is for a press conference. So they kind of treat us like a regular, even though we're social media, they treat us like regular media correspondence a little bit. So the first thing we attend is a press conference where they explain what's going on board the flight. This one was up to the space station, so they were explaining mostly the science experiments, kind of the three big experiments that were going to be on board the flight to the space station. So there's an orbital carbon observatory they're sending up to measure carbon dioxide levels around the Earth. There is some tissue chips on board, which are essentially human tissues that they're sending up, heart tissue, liver tissue they're going to send up to do disease and drug experiments. Mm-hmm. And then one of the ones that kind of shocked me was a group of high school seniors that were setting up a DNA sequencing test, which I like to think I at least somewhat of a bright guy, but the stuff that they were talking about was way over my head. It was unbelievable, the stuff that these high school seniors were going to be setting up to the space station.
Yeah, so what we're looking at here would be the where mission control would be located, or
that's the vehicle assembly building. So that's where the space shuttle was built, the Apollo rockets were built, and that is where the upcoming SLS rocket, that's NASA's new vehicle, is being built in the vehicle assembly building there. So that's basically where they vertically assemble and stack the rockets before they roll them out to the launch
And so
pad.
SpaceX will use this facility for their rocket, or
SpaceX does not use this particular facility. That's a NASA-only facility for NASA rockets. But it is a facility that we get to go into to kind of see the upcoming SLS rockets and the work they're being done there, and the historic nature. Yep, that's inside the vehicle assembly building there. So it's kind of a weird juxtaposition where you've got on the outside this kind of world-famous huge building with the NASA logos, and then you walk inside and it's very much an industrial kind of looking building where it's all business, and there's cranes and there's operators and they're getting to work in there.
Mm-hmm. What are we looking at here?
That's one of the Orion, I think it's Orion test vehicles there that they were essentially using for stacking practice on top of the SLS rocket. So it's basically a weight simulator so that the crane operators could test stacking on top of the upcoming SLS rocket.
Okay. And this would be the launch pad?
That is, historic launch pad 39B. That's basically where the space shuttle was launched from. There were Apollo missions that were launched there, and now it's being repurposed for the SLS launch platform. And so you see all the infrastructure that's in place before the rocket even gets up there, the piping for all the water suppression systems, all the electrical conduits, the tracks that are there to get the crawler up. That's kind of the section there with the tabs is where the tracks are, that the crawler rolls up on the pad, and then the giant flame trench in the middle where all the exhaust from the rocket will head to. So being able to stand up there and knowing that there were astronauts that walked across this pad to go get up into either the Apollo rocket or the space shuttle. So there were a ton to see.
So really going back to the Apollo launches of the 1960s and early 70s, not too much has changed in terms of actually the mechanics of how we're launching any rocket into space. It's still using the same launch pads without too much changes. Or am I mistaken?
Yeah, I mean the principles are still kind of the same. I mean we've still got a lot of the infrastructure that we had from the 60s and 70s is still being used. They're just being refurbished and maybe updated a little bit with fiber optic cables now for faster communications, and some of the things that we've refined over the past couple of decades to bring those costs down and to have more redundancy in place.
So this picture, I'm envisioning the rockets assembled inside the building, and then that door opens and it kind of makes its way from there to the launch pad.
Yep. That's the vehicle. That's the other side of the vehicle assembly building, and inside that door is the mobile launch platform. So essentially, they will stack the SLS rocket on top of that platform there on the other side of the tower. Mm-hmm. That tower has everything, all the connections and everything that the rocket will need to prepare for launch. And then they'll stick it on top of that crawler there, which you're looking at now.
Yep.
That crawler will crawl underneath the mobile launch platform, pick it up, and bring it out to 39B. And it's only a 4-mile journey, but that crawler maxes out at 1 mile per hour. Oh. It takes them 8 hours to bring that pad out there. And they bring the whole rocket and launch system all the way out there, just inch by inch.
And here you are inside. What would this room be?
Yeah, that's one of the launch control rooms that's from launch services at NASA that was preparing for the SpaceX flights. So they had kind of the screens up behind me that were all counting down. They had cameras on the pads, and that's where the controllers would sit a couple hours before launch and basically monitor the flight and get ready get ready for launch. And that's another one of those launch control rooms there. So it's pretty cool to get in there and see where the people are sitting to get prepared for actual flight.
And then when spectators watch these launches, they're generally pretty far away, right? They're across the water, and then the shuttle, it's almost like there's a bleacher set up, but very far away from the rocket itself.
Yeah, there's a lot of places where you can watch the launch from. I mean, typically the closest you can get is about 3 miles, which we were at the closest place that you can be as a spectator. Mm-hmm. Even as somebody that works there, they can't really get any closer, with the exception of the small crew that's in a bunker close by in case they need to get to something. But we were just 3 miles away, and that's about as close as you can get. You see the rocket go, and then just a second or two later, you start to just feel the rumble shake through your whole body, and it's an incredible thing to see. I mean, watching it on TV or on a computer screen is pretty awesome. I watch a lot of rocket launches, but seeing it in person just doesn't compare. I mean, it's like the brightest firework you've ever seen. We watched a night launch for this particular one, and it's all of a sudden at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's like daylight again.
Yeah, there's the rocket right there, right?
Yep. So that was our viewing site, like right on the edge of the water, and then it takes off, and you get a perspective, that you wouldn't normally see, where it's you get to see kind of the arc that it takes as it launches. So you don't, on a computer screen or TV screen, you see it launch, but you don't really see the perspective of kind of the arch that it takes or the angle that it curves at, and you can really see that in person. And so we saw launch, we saw separation, and then we saw them turn the booster around, bring it back, and land it, which is kind of an incredible thing to think that we're able to now bring orbital class boosters back and land them on a ship in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah, and that obviously cuts down on the cost for each launch when you reuse these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
engines and boosters and all kinds of stuff that can now be reused that were just thrown away before.
Well, it's extremely interesting and fortunate for you to be able to get down there and take that, to get to see kind of behind the scenes. And so I'm glad that you could come in and spend some time with us to tell us about it. Just once again, if anyone wants to get in touch with you or see what you do online, I mean, before you even contacted us, I watched some of your videos online, and I was just like, wow, I was curious as to exactly what it was or how you were doing it. But really fascinating stuff, and the YouTube videos to me would be a great place to start if anybody was interested in learning about what you do. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, we're on pretty much every social media, but you can look up Overlook Horizon on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or overlookhorizon.com has links to all our social media. And we've got, so this is kind of the beginning of our high altitude balloon season. Usually we start right about now for the spring, and then we do a couple through the spring and the summer when the winds are favorable. We could do them in the winter, but we're chasing them long distance in the winter time. So spring and summer is best for us. So we're getting started with our flight season, and then we kind of take our little piece of NASA and run our NASA-like missions, and we get to pretend that we're part of the space program up here in New York.
Well, Tory Carissimo, thanks for coming in. And once again, just how can someone get into specifically? I think if there's any students or educators that are watching this that might want to, be involved in one of your launches this coming season, how could they best get in touch with you?
Yeah, probably the best place is overlookhorizon.com. There's a contact us option there, and that comes right directly to me. So we get students and educators all the time that ask us for tips and questions on how to run their flights or what kind of cameras we use, all that kind of stuff. So definitely contact us through overlookhorizon.com, or probably our biggest social media channel is on Twitter at OLHZN. And we have lots of tips and with our flights and weather balloons, but we're also sharing a lot of space news and keeping up with the spaceflight world there.
All right, well, appreciate you taking the time to come in and talk to us, and we'll probably have you in again next time you're down in NASA for a launch. We'd love to hear about it, and also keep us posted about your launches this season. We'd love to share some of the videos with our users.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for watching. It's been another episode of Around the Lakes. You can subscribe to us on YouTube. We're online at fingerlakes1.com. You can contact the show at contact@fingerlakes1.com. And we'll see you next time around the lakes.